1976, S-21 opened its doors in the deserted city of Phnom Penh.
The first people brought into S-21 in May 1976 were members of military units who were thought to be mutinying or performing treason against the regime. They named names of their superiors. Those people were pulled in and named names of their superiors. As 1976 goes on, the tentacles move out, the thing
Prisoners were picked up in villages and piled into trucks for transport to S-21.
They accused us of being subversives and of rising up against Angkar and the road the party was taking. I don't know. In reality, I don't know anything about that. I didn't know where they were taking me.
Nam En was 16 years old when he joined the Khmer Rouge.
I was at S-21. From the beginning, they let us live in S-21 to take pictures of those who were arrested in Cambodia. Some women came in here crying, but they would threaten them, and they would be afraid to speak.
Before being photographed, tags were hung from prisoners' necks. The numbers represented the count of prisoners brought into S-21 on any given day. The prisoners deemed most important, those who might possess more information and could implicate others, were placed in single cells. The rest were herded into communal pens, always chained to a wall or the ground. Prisoners lived under a strict set of rules enforced by guards.
They prohibit us from making conversation. When you sleep and you have to turn over, you have to ask permission. Brother, may I turn over? If you didn't ask and they hear you, we would hear the sound of the chains clinking. They would whip you.
Living conditions were abysmal. Prisoners were fed a small bowl of rice porridge twice a day. Hunger was ever present. Prisoners ate anything.
There was a fluorescent light on the ceiling, and at night the crickets and grasshoppers would come to play in the light. And when they would fall down, you would catch it and put it in your mouth.
Prisoners were not allowed to use the bathroom. Instead, they were forced to relieve themselves in dirty, shared wastebaskets.
The smells in the cells, it was terrible. Since there is no restroom or water, it was hard to stand the smell in the room.
The staff at S-21 was made up mostly of young Cambodian males.
Most of them ranged from 18 down to 14 or 15. They were about that high.
Mostly uneducated and recruited from the countryside, it was an impressionable group, easily swayed by party propaganda and peer pressure.
I don't know anything about history. It was their politics. Everyone joined. I couldn't be the only one who didn't join, so I joined the Khmer Rouge.
By describing prisoners as animals and dangerous conspirators against the party, Khmer Rouge leadership dehumanized their victims in the eyes of the S-21 staff. By 1977, the Khmer Rouge siege was well underway. Hundreds of thousands of Cambodians forced to work the rice fields were dying. For Cambodians, Khmer Rouge violence was a constant threat.
Sister was accused of stealing rice from the rice field. She had two little kids, and she kept denying that she did not steal, and the Khmer Rouge refused to believe. You know what they did to her to prove that my sister stole rice? They took a knife and cut her stomach.
Behind the concrete walls of S-21, similar acts of terror were a daily occurrence. 1 year after opening, a new wave of inmates was on its way.
The second great push is in early '77. People who had been through high school, through university, you start to get a purge of the people who know, the people who know, the people who know. Intellectuals are drawn in, are pulled into the net.
After being entered into the system, most prisoners faced interrogation. In a staff notebook found in the archives, Commander Doik instructed guards on how to question prisoners.
Terrify them. Make them give up hope that they will ever live again or ever be able to survive. Make them think about their family, their wives, their children, and their life.
Interrogators grilled victims until they implicated others in crimes against Ongkar, thus creating a string of traitors.
And they would list, under enough pressure, everybody they'd ever known, from their family, people they knew in the party, people they worked with, people, their school teachers.
Most prisoners were charged with working for one of three groups Pol Pot feared had infiltrated the party: the CIA, KGB, or the Vietnamese.
They said, "You're an American. You're a traitor. You work for the CIA and the KGB, for the Vietnamese. You have to tell us the truth. How many people do you have?" I didn't work for them. I didn't even know what the CIA was.
Good day, Justices. We're here today to talk about the Cambodian genocide and the actions that should be taken. I'd like to start off by saying that the basis for Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge's actions are political. They target opposition members of their political party, and specifically politicians, bureaucrats, religious figures like monks and priests, and military members. Also, they target pro-American, pro-Western, and pro-capitalist people. The basis for their actions is to rid their country of intellectual people that could possibly stand against them. They're able to carry out this genocide through propaganda, including public speeches and hate messages. Pol Pot's strategy involves separating family units to weaken them, and he separates children from their families.
The UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide defines genocide as the killing of members of a specific ethnic, racial, or national group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting the group in conditions of life calculated about its destruction, and transferring children by force to another group. Pol Pot, within his Khmer Rouge and the Cambodian genocide, managed to do all of these things, making it, of course, a genocide. As we dealt with the Nuremberg trials in Germany, we convicted war criminals to death based on...
In a case such as this, there's a lot of responsibility that goes around. The government in Cambodia is heavily responsible for their actions. They're at fault because they removed their opposition through a genocide. They rose to power and formulated plans for murder, killing fields, and re-education camps. These are all tactics for genocide, and they should be punished for it. However, the individuals under them were not as responsible because they were influenced through propaganda and manipulation techniques. The staff in the camps were often young and uneducated.
The inactions and actions of states is also at fault. According to Yale University, the U.S. and our actions in Vietnam are highly at fault for the Cambodian genocide. The Cambodian government was under pressure when the U.S. escalated in 1965 in Vietnam. Peasants were continuing their rice trades with the Viet Cong, however. And the U.S. and South Vietnamese bombing of Cambodian buildings, though we were fighting in Vietnam, led to communist factions making action, and non-governmental organizations and intergovernmental organizations were not able to do anything to prevent this or to stop it because of our lack of scope and unawareness, as well as the amount of attention that was being placed on the war in Vietnam.
As serious as this matter is, the punishment that needs to be handed down is equally severe. Pol Pot was in charge of the Khmer Rouge regime and was the reason behind the mass executions and genocide. Because of this, he should be executed, as well as the rest of the members of his ruling party. For example, a prominent member was Kang Kek Lu, also known as Doik. He ran an S-21 security prison and took part in the killing of mass amounts of Cambodians. Actions such as these should not be left unpunished, and a strict precedent should be enforced.
This follows through with the verdicts of the Nuremberg trials, where high-ranking Nazi officials were sentenced to death for killings and capturings of allies. This is because they had knowledge of what was going on, as did Doik and Pol Pot. They formulated policy, and they were the link between the killing apparatus and the control of political leadership. Also, none of these people stopped the process and tried to prevent what was going on, making them guilty as much as anyone else.
The Khmer Rouge regime ended in 1979. From there, Pol Pot was placed under house arrest until his death in 1998. His wife says that he died in his sleep, but his body was immediately cremated, which leads to suspicion of suicide. Even after the regime was over, he continued his life in his luxury home and was never placed on trial.
Boyk, who we already discussed about, was charged by the UN in 2007, 39 years after his prison camp was first built. In 2008, he was taken to the scene of his crime for the judicial process and broke down into tears. In 2009, his trial began. He was sentenced to 35-year imprisonment with pre-trial detention credit for 11 years. In 2012, an upper UN court for the War Crimes Tribunal rejected his appeal and extended his sentence to life.
The atrocities committed by the Khmer Rouge regime and Pol Pot were horrific. They included up to 2.2 million deaths, implementation of killing fields, concentration camps, and brutal interrogation techniques. He killed families, including children, relentlessly, and all to relieve himself of any political opposition. Going off the precedent of the Nuremberg trials, the people responsible for these actions were tried and hanged, but in this case, they were let off free. Pol Pot spent the rest of his days in his luxury home under house arrest, dying in his sleep. Other members of the regime were punished with simply life in prison. This is not enough of a punishment for the horrific and unspeakable actions that took place. A strict precedent must be set